Welcome. I'm Mary Scifres for Mary Scifres Ministries, and so honored to welcome you to today's webinar on creating a hybrid of virtual and in-person worship. Joining me will be my pastor and partner, BJ Bew, and also my assistant, Carrie Kellogg, who will be managing the questions that come to us through the chat. Those of you who are watching this video after the fact won't get that chance to chat, but I invite you to put comments below on the YouTube video or email us at admin@maryscifres.com with your questions so that we can help you address those questions as together we keep trying to ask the right questions and explore potential answers. The reason I chose this topic today is because I know that many of you are now regathering for live worship. And as we begin regathering for live worship, it's tempting to let go of the virtual worship, to wonder, is it worth it for only 5 or 10 people? And I want to first talk about the reason why I think it is a worthy conversation and an important thing to consider continuing to offer virtual worship options. All right. And the reason that it's important to continue offering virtual worship is twofold in my book. One, you have served people you have never served before in your online community, and you will want to continue that outreach and service to them so that they know that they are still a part of your church, even as your church is largely regathering in person. The other reason, however, is that we may or may not be largely gathering in person. In many instances, some of our longtime church members may choose not to return to worship. They may choose that they love the online option. It feels safer to them. It's more convenient to them. We'll talk a little bit later about some of the advantages that people are experiencing in virtual worship. But inclusion is a huge value that I bring to the table, and I believe all of you bring to the table. And the more we offer both the online and the in-person option, the more fully inclusive we can be as worship leaders and church leaders. And that makes it worth the effort in my book. But it's important that in your team knows the reason in your book. And so always start with that question. Why is this important to us? Is it going to be worth the effort? Because as I'll talk with you later, um, it's going to be a lot of effort to have both and. And so really have an answer for the why. And later on, we'll talk about what we can do so that the effort doesn't become overwhelming. Beach, I'm going to toss it to you for a second because I know that your church is already, I believe you're one of the ones that are getting ready to reopen on Pentecost Sunday. Will you be offering any kind of hybrid option? And if so, why? Why is that important to your people?
Yeah, we've been live streaming since the pandemic started, and as we actually moved back to in-person worship in the parking lot, but we had the capability of live streaming from the parking lot, and it's been very clear and important to the congregation that the live stream remain because there are people who, as you said, don't feel safe coming back, but there are people who can't come back. And it's one of the hardest things about being a pastor is knowing that so many of your congregation who are shut-ins just they miss worship. And it used to be that you had to record it if you could do it, and then you would have to burn a whole bunch of CDs and then mail them out or deliver them, and it was a pain in the tuchus. But this is, getting somebody over to an older person's home and helping them get up with Zoom and making sure that they can do it is generally a one-time kind of deal, and then they can worship at home anytime they want. But for our congregation, they really wanted to get back. They were super eager. We had 75 people showed up for a sunrise service on Easter, and we had 150 people in the parking lot last Sunday, and I'm expecting the same number, perhaps even a few more this Sunday, because it was very well received. So they're excited, and I think it's important for them to know that they are not leaving anybody behind by wanting and demanding really to come back in person.
So once you've named your big why, as BJ and his church leadership have, the next question is what? What are the best options for your community? What are the best options? Because your community has different technological abilities, different staffing, different needs than the community down the street or in the next state. And it's been a challenging season because we we've really been able to see what one another are doing, and sometimes that means that we get into the comparison game. And I want to encourage you as you move into this new season of creating hybrid ways of reaching your people, of finding a way to say, yes, we can do this and we can also do that, that you choose the options that are right for your community rather than getting stuck in the comparison game. I don't know if you want to do a show of hands or a little thumbs up with your emojis. How many of you found yourself in the comparison game about 2 or 3 months into the pandemic when you realized you could see what all of your colleagues and co-leaders around the nation were doing? I saw myself thinking, oh, that pastor's doing daily morning prayer. Why am I not doing that? Yes. I was like, wow, that person's praise band has figured out how to sing masked, safely distanced. Oh, why didn't I figure that out? Somebody else figured out how to do virtual choir. And my team and I found ourselves constantly doing that comparison game. This is not our best, most helpful way to come up with the what. It's okay to look and get ideas from our colleagues, but you want to figure out what are the best options for your community. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, is how can you discern and discover what those best options are. So I want to talk first about some of the advantages of each style of worship, because they both do have some very distinct advantages as you start thinking about the what. And this list is not by any means exhaustive. You can jot down and add to your own notes about this. You will all be getting the slide deck in a couple of days so that you'll have this and you can turn it into a PDF and write on it to your heart's content. But within virtual worship, one of the realities, whether it's a positive reality or negative reality, is we find people have a shorter attention span. We are accustomed on the screen to those 12-minute sound bites of sitcoms, and we can make it through about a 30 to 35-minute worship service if we're really, really attentive. Once you start pushing us to the 45, 55-minute mark, most of us are not dedicated enough screen viewers to stay on fully involved. Whereas in-person worship, there's the advantage of people sit down and they give you their focused attention. Now, I know there's always been the urban legend that they're out there writing grocery lists, but they also are giving you their best attention to the best of their ability. And it is a little easier to stay focused with that interactive in-person. In in-person worship, I'm hearing a lot about, oh, I've missed my community. And there's a real potential there as we regather to regain that larger sense of community. But virtual worship has given us a sense of intimacy. You have invited your pastors like me into your homes. We have shared together communion, each in our own tables. And that potential for really strengthening that sense of intimate community can continue with your virtual worship options. I remember last Advent when BJ and I released Worship at Home Advent Christmas, one of the test pilot audiences was a major worship leader in the United Methodist Church. And when she gave us her feedback, she kind of gave us one of those backwards compliments. She said, well, it really isn't the basic pattern of worship, and it really isn't very based on the liturgical season, which BJ and I both disagreed with, but that wasn't the point of her email. The longer point of her email was, my kids were fully engaged. The hands-on participatory ways that you gave us of worshiping together were things we could never have done if we'd been sitting in a pew in the sanctuary. So that potential for intimate community as you think about your virtual options is of high value and might give you some new options now that you are likely to going to have in-person and virtual. Virtual worship, of course, the big opportunity is that we can participate from multiple locations, whether we are homebound, whether we are home centered, whether we are on vacation, whether we have to work during a worship time. We have an opportunity to join in from multiple locations. In person worship has the beauty of being able to participate from a familiar location. And I have heard that yearning. I know how much people are really looking forward to that return to some familiar location, whether it's the courtyard or the sanctuary or the fellowship hall. Virtual worship challenges us because it calls us for additional ways of building community. You do not have to raise your hand to tell me that you're not a millennial. But my guess is very few of us are millennials on this call. And unless we are a millennial or a Gen Z, creating community online probably doesn't come to us instinctively the way it would to those generations. So virtual worship will require us to continue finding additional ways of building community together. BJ, you look like you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, it is building community in the sense that there were a lot of grandparents who spoke to me about how they just refused to learn the online stuff when their grandkids lived across the country or out of state or whatnot. And they're like, well, Grandma, if you're willing to Zoom with me, then I'd love to talk to you. And like, I won't learn that, but they have learned that. And if they continue to have access to Zoom and even Zoom somewhat frequently, they will retain the knowledge of how to do that. And it increases the intimacy within their own family. Um, our family started Zooming weekly on Sundays, and we never would have done that if the church wasn't already Zooming. So there is intimacy that's valued so much that it's being explored in larger venues outside the church.
Thanks. That's a wonderful reminder. And wow, wonderful opportunity, right, for the church to be the headlight instead of the tail light to help these families connect virtually. You're right. Also creates intimacy in our smaller communities. What a wonderful thing. Thanks. That's a wonderful thing to point out. Um, of course, the in person worship also has its own community challenges that we may have forgotten about after a year and a half of being away from each other. But the new challenge now, which is a new opportunity, is that in person worship has always called us for finding ways of inviting and welcoming new friends and guests. And I really want to encourage you as you begin reopening for in person worship to really maximize this opportunity. If your people are excited about coming back to worship, encourage them, numbers permitting, to invite friends to join them. One of the churches I work with has been online, of course, since last March, and they added a television ministry, and they've reached literally thousands of people through their television ministry. So through the summer, their television ministry will be advertising, come to our campus. Come see the beautiful space in which we worship, because this will be the first time many of those people will have ever even thought of walking into that church building. But now they know about that church, and it's an opportunity for that church to reach out, invite, and welcome new guests and friends. Most of us don't have a television ministry with thousands of people, but we do have a dozen people or a few dozen people returning to worship who have friends and family members who also are in desperate need of spiritual nourishment and fellowship in this challenging season that we have been enduring. And then, of course, both, I want to point out both because sometimes I think we think only virtual worship requires technology and staffing. But both in-person and virtual worship require technology and staffing. They just require different types of technology and staffing. So as we look at those options, we will be talking about some of the specifics around what you need. So I'm going to move on to what I see as the three primary options or three primary questions to be considering within your team. If you have questions or comments about what we've just talked about the comparison of virtual and in-person and the how, the why, and the what, just put those into the chat and Carrie will send those along to us for question and answer as that comes up. But for now, I want to talk about one option which I think a lot of people feel a great deal of pressure toward because maybe it seems like it might be the easiest, even if it's not. Um, my son, who is a professional filmmaker and works as the videographer, video editor, and tech manager for a United Methodist Church here in Southern California, says to me, everybody wants to do live streaming of worship. It has the highest point of failure, Mom. Just remind them. And he even works at a church that they hired him because they were purchasing live streaming equipment last summer, preparing for the day whenever they would, back when we thought we'd be regathered by last Christmas. They were preparing so that they could regather and just live stream the worship. Of course, many, many months have passed since then, and that church is still opting not to go for this live streaming option, even as they are preparing to gather in person. Eventually they might, but for those, on the other hand, I think BJ's church is going to go for the live streaming of worship option. And so with that in mind, B, do you want to take us through some of these questions that we kind of asked together if the live streaming was right for you? How did you address these questions?
Um, well, the first one was, lighting and sound. Live streaming inside, your lighting should be pretty, should be fine as long as you've got a camera that the aperture will open up wide enough to get enough light. You should be fine. But if you're outside, you have to have your sound equipment. We had a hum in the and everything on our entire live stream on Sunday because it was outdoors and we were running a super long cable all the way from the parking lot into the soundboard. And then we had we replaced a camera lens. We had a wider angle lens that was very unsatisfactory for people. They wanted to be able to zoom in and actually see. So if you just have a stationary camera that's wide angle, you don't get the sense of intimacy that you would expect when you see something on TV because they do zoom in on TV. And so we have that expectation, even though you can't zoom in from your seat in live worship, you do expect it when you're seeing something on a screen. And outdoors, we were sweating bullets on last Sunday because it, poured down rain all the way from Laguna Beach up to Manhattan Beach, but it cleared and, uh, it was great. So that was, in terms of the space, do you want to say anything more about space from
Well,
your?
I would just say I'll push back a little bit. Your sanctuary's a little newer and brighter. Lighting is important inside if you have some of the larger, more cavernous sanctuaries. I know Lida and I've talked often about her sanctuary. Hi, Lida, I see you there. That it's so cavernous. Neil Patton, one of the tech people on our team, went to her early in the pandemic to see if they could even pre-record in the sanctuary. And ultimately, she's decided wisely that pre-recording outdoors has been easier. Lida, do you want to tell us a little bit about some of the things that you do? I know it's not live streamed, but what are some of the things you've had to do to make even the outdoor space and lighting and sound work?
It's been challenging, and in fact, that's funny you bring this up because we're having problems right now with our equipment. I've been filming on my iPhone and then bought, a mic that goes with your iPhone and the little wind thing because we are outside and we do get winds. We're in a wind tunnel. And now the program has stopped working. So right now, until we buy another program, we're just filming with the phone. But lighting is an issue. Shadows are an issue that you don't think about indoors because some of us are in direct sunlight and some of us, half of our faces are shadowed. So you have to be very flexible, and it's wonderful to have someone with a good eye running your phone and or camera because they can make sure that you can see everybody's faces. And then when the time change happened, we had to find alternative sources of light outdoors. And so I climbed up on the roof and moved the outdoor lighting so they were like little baby spotlights. So, it's challenging, but for us, because we're in that lovely large sanctuary, it's just very hard to get a good picture and decent sound. And we found it easier in a smaller space out of doors.
So even if you're live streaming, you're going to want to look at what are the best spaces for lighting and sound. Do you have the right video equipment, the right video placement? And is outdoor, indoor better for your people in terms of safety of the worship service and in terms of how you can accommodate the right number of people. And that brings the other thing about live streaming is you have to have the right people for live streaming to work. First off, you have to have a congregation that's willing to let you turn the video on when they are worshiping. Prior to the pandemic, I was serving a church that live streamed, and they had trouble when they went to live stream. They knew they wanted to do it to reach a larger number of people. It was before there was a pandemic, so it wasn't absolutely essential, but it took months for that congregation. This would have been back in 2016 when they started live streaming. And it was probably 6 months after they put the equipment in before the congregation fully settled into, okay, this is okay. And even by the time I arrived, they required that the video go off when we were taking communion. So understand your people if you're live streaming, and even if you're recording a live worship for release later, which we'll talk about next, make sure your congregation is willing to be on screen and find out what their limits are and what their desires are. And you may have to do a little convincing and persuading about evangelizing and reaching a larger community, and sometimes the sacrifices we make. And then, of course, I'm sure you were expecting me to say, what's the technical expertise we have on our team? Do we have the funding to either pay staff or hire trainers to come in and train volunteers? Don't try to do this on your own. I know we all tried to do this on our own last March. Hopefully most of us have learned since that time we need help. You're going to need even more help if you're going to a hybrid option, because it's not just twice as much work. It's exponential how much more work it will be to create a hybrid option. And then I see Andrew's already asking questions about live stream platforms. I'll have Carrie bring us to those. Even once you figure out a platform, you have to have staff or volunteer members of your church who can host the live stream. Carrie, you want to tell us about Andrew's question?
He's just simply asked which platforms most people are using, the continuing troubles with YouTube and Facebook. And then it looks like Allison did share that, once you put your appropriate information out, that some of those do calm down. But I think they're looking for a little bit more information if you care to share in that direction.
Okay, well, I can't claim to be the technical expert, and my technical expert is videotaping today, so he's not on the webinar. So I will certainly ask Michael Bew, who is our tech expert on the team, for his advice. But it is true that the external live stream platforms are more successful, even if you eventually are streaming to YouTube or Facebook. To use one of the professional live stream platforms is often more dependable. But the disadvantage of those outside platforms, and I can include a list of those. I do have a list of those. I can include those with the slide deck. I don't have them on today's slide deck. But the outside platforms, which my son is not a big fan of, he finds very disadvantageous because they can't reach beyond your logged in official users. And he assumes most churches would like your virtual worship to be reaching a larger community and out there in the world. And that is the advantage of struggling with Vimeo or YouTube or Facebook to host your live stream. And there are ways, Andrew, to live stream into YouTube. It's not as challenging as you would think. And Andrew, I think you and Michael have each other's email address. So email him and he'll tell you how. Both YouTube and Facebook do have some of the copyright issues. But as Allison said, once you get kind of your licensing in place, you still need to have somebody who manages it. I would say, most of you know, I release a couple videos a month. And the music on those videos is all Creative Commons music. But we still get tagged. Usually once every couple of months. And Michael's my tech manager. I don't know how he does it. He has to go into YouTube, explain to them it's Creative Commons, that it's copyright free, and we have use permission or whatever. And then they release the tag. But that's another chore that most of us in leadership don't have the time or the expertise for. So whoever's hosting your live stream or managing your platform is also going to manage some of that back end stuff, Andrew, so that you don't lose a congregation or an audience in the middle of what you really want to be a worship service that everyone can fully participate in. And then the other thing you need, as we kind of have alluded to, is you need the right equipment. And it's probably obvious and intuitive to all of us now, we need quality video equipment and quality sound equipment. Certainly if you have been videotaping on your iPhone, that is not going to be a sufficient choice for live streaming. As BJ said, they already had live streaming equipment at his church because they were live streaming before the pandemic, but they even had to buy a different type of lens to manage a more intimate feel for the outdoor live stream. So knowing what you need for quality video and sound. But the thing I would put here that is the often huge hiccup is you will need very strong internet speed for consistent, high quality live stream. And many of us in Southern California, even in urban areas, because of the water and the canyons and the hills and the agedness of our internet system, don't often have the internet that we need to make live streaming your best option. So that's one option. But the other option that I'm finding more and more pastors and worship leaders are leaning toward is just simply recording whatever you're going to do in person. Again, you still need to make sure that what you're doing in person has the right space, and it won't for everybody. Can you get the video equipment placed correctly without disturbing people's in-person worship experience? Do you have the lighting, the sound, the right outdoor, indoor option? And many of the same questions for live streaming. Are your people willing to be recorded? Do you have the technical expertise for recording while also managing an online platform? And if you want to do any post-production editing out of things, for instance, the church that I worked at that wanted to edit out the communion piece, then you need an editorial team. I really recommend that. I think if you're going to record your in-person worship, it makes a lot of sense to go ahead and edit it before you release it, even if that means it doesn't release until 5 o'clock on Sunday evening. Because then you can add a title slide that gives the address of your church. You can add a closing slide that gives the website address and invites people to be a part of things. So I do recommend, if you are recording your in-person worship, that you don't just release the raw footage. If at all possible, hire an editor to help with just at least the beginning and the ending pieces. And then you're going to need to make sure you have funding or training to take care of the staffing needs there. And then, of course, on this one, internet speed is not as big a deal, although your video person, if they have to upload and download at church, might say it is. But you don't have the instantaneous need that live streaming requires. I see Pete Burnson answered Andrew's question. In case you're not in the chat, I want to just give Pete's really good advice for those of you who are having the same question Andrew was about live streaming platforms. Pete writes that they use YouTube, moving to Restream to stream to multiple content distribution networks. That sounds really complicated, I know to you, but the moving to Restream allows it to go then to Facebook and Vimeo and even Facebook Live. That's a pretty complicated little piece. Again, I'll put that in the notes, but Pete, thanks for that reminder because that's a really helpful reminder. Carrie, will you make sure to cut and paste that into my notes? Thank you. So we're going to come to the third option, which usually makes pastors tremble in their shoes. And any pastors on this call, don't hang up. I know you're thinking about leaving when I say, I really hope many of you will consider offering 2 different worship experiences. This is another option. It has the least point of failure, but the greatest amount of work required of the pastor, the musicians, and your other worship leaders. When you offer different worship experiences, the gift is that you're offering 2 worship experiences, and therefore you can fully serve both your virtual community and your in-person community fully, with all of your attention focused on that one community of people. BJ reminded me that one of the things that happened in the 90s when we often started doing 2 worship services in 2 different styles was that we did lose some connection. So I'm going to ask BJ if he would talk with us a little bit about what you and I were talking about this morning, BJ, so that we don't lose that connection.
Well, and it's not just a connection, but you form 2 different congregations. So if you've got 2 different service styles and you have people that always go to the 9 o'clock service and always go to the 11 o'clock service, even if you have a coffee hour in between, typically those congregations become isolated. and then you lose that sense of unity that you want. And the nice thing about this model is you can do something so different that your folks in a traditional or whatever service will go to it if it's a prayer or if it's just, evening vespers or whatnot, and they can still sense that common unity as a congregation. They don't feel fractured into different bodies.
That's a really important aspect to keep in mind if you go to the two worship option, because we don't want to create further division. My goodness, we've felt enough division through the distancing of this last year and a half as it is. We want to create a full sense of community, that we are one with each other, one in ministry, one saved by the same love and grace of the same God, whether we are worshiping virtually or worshiping in person. So I think I'm actually going to jump down to the last bullet point on this screen, that what we want to do in both cases is create interactive and participatory opportunities. And that those might include ways of interacting and participating across both platforms. For instance, when BJ and I did the Worship at Home series, we would end each order of worship with a half a dozen different hands-on ideas for things that people could do to take that worship message out into their week ahead, beyond the minutes of worship that they had spent. And, maybe they could take a fruit basket to a neighbor, or they could send cards to people that they thought were living alone. Different kinds of hands-on participatory ways that you could offer the same participatory ideas to both your in-person and your virtual worship. I don't know if Harriet Wilkin is on this call, but Harriet has done something like that. Maybe it's Lida. I think Harriet and Lida have both done that with their people who can't get online. That both of these pastors, who are serving very small churches with a lot of older members, some of whom just do not have online capability or willingness. So these two pastors both mail not only the worship bulletin, but some of the participation ideas that they are suggesting to their online worshiping community, so that even those people who are homebound and unable to worship online are at least invited to still participate in the same way the full community has been allowed and invited to participate. So that's one way to kind of cross that boundary so that we don't have a separation between the two. When I'm talking about two different experiences, I'm not saying what the virtual will be. Obviously, the in-person can be sanctuary, outdoors, fellowship hall. For now, we can have instrumental music, live music, vocal music, still a little questionable. You can start returning to a more familiar order of worship if that's what your people want. Although it might not be the best option, you might still want to keep that shorter, more informal, interactive order of worship that you've developed. But you can go back to a more formal, traditional order if you want. And of course, the beautiful part of in-person worship is your worship leaders get to respond and interact with the congregation in a way that really has eluded us in most of our virtual options. And virtual worship can be pre-recorded and released for viewing later, or it can be hosted live on Zoom. The pastor I was talking about who does daily prayer is planning to continue daily prayer, and he's going to a new church. And he has hosted daily morning prayer on Zoom since the pandemic began. And for him, I remember when he first told me, I said, that's insane. You're going to work every day of the week. And what? That's too much work. It has been such a soul nurturing spiritual practice for him that's the right answer for him and for his community. And a couple dozen people have joined in and participated. He doesn't know in the new church how that will pan out, but he's still really committed to that spiritual practice. And it's just on Zoom. Simple. Gets up, opens up his book of common prayer, and takes them through the morning devotional. And that's just hosted live on Zoom. Similarly, you can host something on Facebook Live. That you can just click your iPhone on, do it on Facebook Live. I remember early in the pandemic, another colleague was doing a midweek devotional every Wednesday at noon. She would just pop into Facebook Live, have a 5 to 10 minute devotional for those who wanted to pop in. And of course, on Facebook Live, then it continues on, forever as just a video that people can see after they Facebook Live with you. So you can see when I'm talking about the second virtual worship service, it doesn't necessarily have to be a full 30 to 40 minute worship experience. It can be something shorter, something more informal, something less preparation required of you and your people, but still a way for the virtual community to be fed spiritually. It can also be an exact imitation of what you're doing in your live worship, and that you just record at a later time, perhaps in a shorter format, perhaps with different music selections or what have you. And Jason Moore, when I was in his Both And webinar, he suggested that if you're in a church, for instance, that likes praise music, do a separate recording of a half a dozen praise songs, because some people just want to sing the praise songs, but most people just want to hear the sermon. And his suggestion was do several small pieces if you're doing the pre-recorded and releasing those, because then people that want to just see the piece they want to see, they get more of that feeds their soul, which helps to feed the variety of spiritual types. The advantage, again, of virtual worship is that we are reaching people who can log in from anywhere. And I know that many of you have reached people who do not live near your sanctuary. So you want to keep reaching those people, and the virtual option gives them a way of still connecting with you. And of course, in virtual worship, we can still sing. Carrie, you wanted to say something.
There's a little bit of a side conversation going on that it may not fall exactly. And the first one was about costs of the live stream and the technology. If there was a comment back and forth and an answer if somebody wants to go back and check that. But what's current to what you're talking now is there was a comment about doing some podcasts to supplement. And let me go. I missed what the next one. Anyway, there's a little bit there that people are sharing extra ways that they also are participating this way.
So we'll make sure to copy all of that chat so that I can include those notes for you on the slide deck. But one thing that Marlene asks me about, she mentions this, and so that I don't overwhelm you, I'm going to invite, I'm going to go ahead and address this question that Marlene has, because some of you may be having the same questions. She said, we are considering many of the options you're listing. As a small congregation, how shall we try to live into one of these options? Okay, so if I could easily change my PowerPoint slides, I'd go back and put that big why on the screen again. The first would be to ask why. Well, she says right here, they've been doing live Zoom for the last year, and they've seen around 5 to 20 folks who now are part of their congregation who do not live near their church. Out of state, out of area. It's Southern California. You can't drive very far anyway. So that's a big why. They've got 5 to 20 people that they will want to continue serving. But now the what is addressed by the fact it's 5 to 20 people. And so this is a small congregation, a staff that probably are stretched pretty thin. So as they decide what the best option would be, I think it's really important they look at who those 5 to 20 are and what gifts and abilities they bring to the conversation. I am looking for your window, Marlene. If you want to unmute yourself, I would welcome I'll do a quick coaching session with you on this. There she is.
Hi.
Good to see you. Thanks for
Nice
being
to
here.
see you. This is great. Oh, thank you so much for doing this. We are knee deep in these questions and gathering all kinds of information. And I'm going to present to worship committee and council soon a couple of options, exactly what you're suggesting. So I guess we have 40 to 60 people in worship. We've maintained that with Zoom. 5 to 10, I was a typo, I was on my phone. 5 to 10 have come from outside who will not be able to join us. So Jake and I, who are co-pastors, are thinking, so how much money do we invest? $5,000. Okay, that's a possibility. How long shall we do it? And then what if we only have 5 people or 10? I mean, I'm just asking that question of the time it'll take, the energy, the extra staffing to staff we're going to have 2 cameras, blah, blah, blah.
Okay. So let's talk 2 different things. Let's talk percentages. So if you have 50 people in worship and 5 of them are only going to be able to worship virtually, what's that percentage there? It's an easy one, right? 10%, right? So how many of you would find it a banner year if your church grew by 10%? Let's see some thumbs up and some hands. Yeah, okay. So it's worth doing something. That seems clear. But it's 5 people and 50 people total, which means, okay, if 10% of the people do 90% of the work, that means, Marlene, what, you have 5 people who can help you at the most, probably, in a small church? How many workers do you have that you can count on to help with the worship life?
Well, we're weird because we sold our building.
Okay.
So right now, do not quote me on this. We have plenty of money. I
Okay.
have my bean counters that are very anxious because somehow $8.5 million is not enough. But we really are not hurting for money. But as a 120 member church that's renting, it wouldn't hurt to grow, wouldn't hurt to keep broadening, whatever. And we're doing great things. I'm not concerned, blah, blah, blah. But money, we can hire part-time staff.
Okay. So you see how her situation is probably different than yours. Okay. They don't have a building. They rent a building. So they don't have the overhead costs of building maintenance, which I know for many of you are very burdensome. So that gives them some financial freedom to look at some part-time staff options. So Marlene, as you think about what has worked well about the Zoom experience, um, how would you like to capitalize that or continue that for whomever might want to be a part of that?
Well, we've done a live Zoom experience. However, because the music was so bad, we have pre-taped our music. So the 2 things that have been really wonderful for us are that we have quality music, we have interactive, we have coffee hour afterwards, and we don't use screens in our worship service. We have done all kinds of beautiful pictures. We've used video stuff, and that's been really fun under some music. So we have 15 pictures that we send. Our musicians are very talented. They record their stuff like that. And so we won't have that when we come back to in worship. And I think people really like that. But those are the things. So we have not pre-recorded and said, there it is if you want it. We feel like, and the feedback we get is our gift is that we do live what we're doing right now. Hi, great to see you. Da, da, da. Someone have an announcement. Now we're going to hear a piece of music, and then a beautiful piece of music comes through. So that's been our specific sort of wonderful thing.
When do you have a target date for when you're coming back to in person?
Probably late July, because the Methodist Church in Pasadena, where we rent, they're going to go back July 11th. And we just thought, why should everybody do it the same day? Let's give them 2 weeks to work out. And we stagger. They finish, we come in. But we're asking questions of, what about kids? What about unvaccinated? What about people who've been worshiping with us that can't come? Can't we continue this? What about coffee hour? I mean, we're so comfortable Zooming. I mean, we're tired of it. Everyone's tired, but everyone's like, why would we come back to singers being masked, people being masked? What do we get? So I think we're sort of looking at a hybrid, because there will be some that just don't feel comfortable, or their kids aren't vaccinated, or their family member has been on a ventilator, and they're just not coming back until this thing is over. So late July, hopefully.
So the good news in Marlene's case is they've got 2 full months to figure this out. And I want to point out that some of you I know already started last week, or you're starting this coming week, and you may think, oh, I'm sorry. Remember the next screen, it's always going to be time to continue to adapt and adjust as you learn and figure it out. And that's absolutely fine. Beach, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, I got a lawnmower behind me, so hopefully that won't be too loud. And this goes back to the first slide. It goes back to the why. just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And we've been doing some things during COVID that we really should continue because they factor into a bigger why about our congregations. But there are other things that we've been doing we can probably let go of. And the question always is, okay, you've got 5 people who won't be part of your church, but you've also got a whole bunch of people who have had an enhanced worship experience because of the music in the videos and whatnot. And then, so I would drill down into the why. What's the why that drives us now? Not what was the why that drove us before. But you have a new opportunity because you don't have a building. You've got some money. You've got bean counters. Everybody does. But what is the why that will allow you to take the best of what you had and the best of what you've been doing recently and saying, what propels us forward and why does it propel us forward? And we need to answer those questions theologically, ecclesiologically, and every other way.
Amen.
Can
You
I
know,
just,
go ahead,
just for,
Marlene.
I don't want to dominate this, but that's really, really helpful. Thank you very much. And I will tell you that one of my neighbors is Catholic and they have been worshiping out in the parking lot since December. And, that's an example of something that we can't do because we don't own the building. We stagger worship. And so there are things that we have like money, blah, 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 but we don't have the freedom to just say, well, heck, we got 50 people. We can put you in the parking lot in chairs, distancing outside. And so I do want to affirm that everybody has something that works for them that might not work for somebody else. But thank you, both of you, really helpful.
You're really welcome, Marlene. And feel free to call if you want to set up a coaching appointment, because that answer. Thanks, BJ, for reminding us that the central decision making goes back to the why. And then as Marlene and her team can answer that why, then they can start to think outside the box and decide what is the right option. One of the questions I was really curious as I was thinking about hearing how much her people have enjoyed and appreciated the Zoom experience. If perhaps when they return to in-person worship, if in-person worship shouldn't be the simplified short thing, and Zoom worship might get still the majority of time and attention. Because if that's so successful, it's very possible. We never know until we reopen and we're seeing both extremes. I'm seeing churches where 71 people show up when they were expecting 17, and I'm seeing 17 show up when they were expecting 71. So you won't know until you reopen. And so again, make a plan and then adapt as you figure out what the plan is. But keep at least one of the choices. If you're going to go to the 2 different worship service options, keep one of them simple. Even if you have the staffing to do the buku things. This church that I work with in the Midwest would have the staffing to do buku things, but their staff have ministry responsibilities. They want to be about disciple making. They want to be about being out there and doing social justice and working for racial inclusion and working to protest the increasing disparity between the rich and the poor. They don't want to spend all their time managing technology. So as you look at worship, remember worship is what propels us into service and ministry into the world. And if it's the only thing that we have time for, then we aren't able to be propelled into ministry and service into the world. So even as you're thinking about this, you want to be thinking about ways that worship is a nourishing, strengthening center to our week that helps us grow spiritually so that we can be stronger disciples, making the world a better place. Carrie, did you want to chime in?
There, just as a comment from Andrew and a follow-up from Harriet, supporting this concept of simple. Andrew shared that he was doing just what he had termed as church light, just some prayers and scripture that brought in people not associated with the church. So the simple, I just wanted to support that.
Thank you.
And going back to the previous example, if you've got a church where you've only got 5 people that are meeting offline or online, excuse me, but you've also got in your entire congregation that has been loving this music and the videos and the photos underneath or on top of, whichever you want to view it, the music, maybe that's your second service. You just take what you've been doing, the best part of that, and then so for people that really love the music and just do something very simple, but really focus on the pieces that you've been doing online and say, hey, we're just going to continue to do that on a simple basis. Then it simplifies the in-person too, because then you don't have that responsibility.
I love that idea. Marlene, thank you for inspiring us in this direction. As we get ready to close our time together, I'm going to finish up content and then I'll stay on for another 15 minutes to answer any additional questions. But I promised you that content would be done well before 11, so we will. But do just step forward in faith. One of my favorite phrases is take imperfect action. We have taken so much imperfect action this last year and a half, and you know what? It's worked. Look at that. Look how many imperfect things, how many times online didn't work, cell phones failed, internet failed, and still our people continued to arrive, to participate in the community, to say thank you. And you showed up and continued to stay in ministry and didn't quit. Honestly, I'm Methodist, and the bishops were just sure the attrition rate was going to be 25 to 40% this July. And it's high. It's about 10 to 15%, but nothing like what we were predicting in December. So thank you for staying engaged in ministry. Keep experimenting and adapting, and just laugh and have fun. I'm gonna tell another story on both Lida, and also I don't think that Mary Burgelitis is on the call, but both Lida and Mary, another coaching client of mine, released a blooper video early in the pandemic. To this day, their 2 blooper videos still have the highest viewer rate of any of their worship videos. So people like to laugh and have fun, and they have good viewer rates on their worship videos, but it's just, laughter has been such a healing gift through this difficult season. And so as much as you can, keep it lighthearted and imagine that Jesus would like to break bread and pour you a glass of wine also. And trust God to guide the way. And in the words of my other favorite prophet, Walt Disney, keep moving forward. Walt once said, around here, we don't look backwards for very long. We keep moving forward, opening up new doors and doing new things because we're curious. And curiosity keeps leading us down new paths. So speaking of which, I know that you are needing resources. Some of you may not yet be subscribed to Creative Worship Made Easy. So I want to give you a special offer for staying on the video all the entire 45, 55 minutes. And that is that you can have 3 months at half price this summer. This resource subscription is normally $50 a month, but I'll give you 3 months for $75, which will give you everything you need for summer planning, and the fall planning all comes out in August. So you'll have everything you need for fall for only 3 months. That includes theme-based ideas for the whole season, creative worship ideas, which include song suggestions, image ideas, video ideas, and hands-on participation ideas, sermon starters, and words for worship. And then big bonus I've added starting June 1st, due to the pandemic, a whole series of articles from these webinars and ongoing conversations, your virtual worship questions answered. So you can just visit marycifresministries.com if you'd like to sign up for that. Or just email me. You can see more about me if you need some coaching and consulting help. I will tell you right now, my coaching docket is almost full. But I am meeting with people and starting a waiting list. And I do have 2 other coaches on my team who have availability. We work primarily around transition and change guidance for situations like this. And then visioning and strategic planning as you're ready to make your plans for moving forward. And ongoing vocational discernment. I know a lot of you have questions about what's next in your ministry and your leadership, and we would love to be of assistance and help. Thank you all for staying with us so long. Grateful to have you here, and just grateful for this opportunity to connect and to be together. And just thank you. You all are amazing. Thank you for staying in ministry. Thank you for being true to your people, true to your call. And please let us know if we can be of support as you continue to move forward in your journey. We are honestly just privileged to be a part of your ministry and in support of the work that you're doing in the world. So again, like I did last time, I'll stay on for about 10 minutes as the rest of you go about your days. But Mary Scifres here for Mary Scifres Ministries. Anytime you want some help, just let us know, and we will be happy to reach back and support you on your journey. Thanks for joining us today.